One of the most common mistakes that I see people make with a handgun is their grip. The grip is where the human interaction meets the firearm. That's your way of communicating with the firearm and controlling its communication back with you. It's just absolutely vital. An improper grip is generally the downfall of people's good shooting ability. So we want to walk through it. We want to make sure that we get some good details in it and show you what works for us. Some people have slightly modified versions, but I think you'll see that most modern shooters are going to use some very, very minute variation of what we're about to discuss. Now, the first thing that we have to understand when establishing our grip is understanding the basics of science. Basically, we know that energy is going to take the path of least resistance. Okay, that's a pretty easy concept for us, I think. So, and keep in mind, some of these topics that I'm about to cover are not my own. I didn't come up with these. These are scientific evaluations from studies and research of people, long before I started shooting. But Travis Haley, for instance, does a great demonstration of if you were to shoot one-handed right here, the firearm is going to go up and this way. Because there's nothing that's counterbalancing on this side. There's nothing that stops the energy from going up and this way. Conversely, if I were to shoot with my left hand, as soon as I fire, it's going to go up and this way. Okay, and obviously I'm over-exaggerating. This is a 9mm, but it's going to go up and this way because there's nothing controlling the energy here. This is now the path of least resistance, right? That makes sense. So what goes wrong with most shooters? Well, most of the time I see shooters who get a grip with their wrists in the wrong position. They're not really indexed out, and so you'll hear people talk about the recoil or the kick of a handgun. I mean, I've trained women shooters that are 115 pounds that can shoot a .45 all day, and it's because they get into a good grip, a good shooting position. One of the things that we want to make sure of when we start, we want to make sure that we can take our hand and draw a 45-degree angle from our thumb to the right in between these two fingers. Okay, so from here to here, that should create that 45-degree angle. Next, what I want to do is I want to be able to take the firearm and put it into that 45-degree angle. I want to put that firearm here and then wrap my grip around it. So from the other side, my 45-degree angle, when I put the firearm in it and I wrap my hands around, you see that this thumb comes up very far onto the front of it. And I actually have some grip tape on my Glocks, or on all of my handguns really, where that thumb should be able to create a friction point. So 45-degree angle, I put that firearm into it. I have a good 45-degree angle with my wrist here. You see this wrist is basically now one solid unit as opposed to what most people do, which is right here. Well, now the path of least resistance is in your wrist. So all of that energy transfer when you fire this firearm is going to go here. Versus if I have this locked and my elbows are slightly bent, this will be the path of least resistance. Another common mistake I see is that people lock their elbows. And when they lock it, my elbows are now both pointed up. So especially female shooters for some reason like to lean back away from the firearm. So when they're here, now the path of least resistance is right here. It's not nearly as unpleasant, it's not nearly as uncomfortable, and it's not nearly as bad as the wrist, but what it does is, watch the muzzle rise. I mean, this front sight is dancing all over the place. I can't keep up with it, so my follow-up shots are just going to be incredibly slow. What I want to do is when I take that good 45-degree angle, roll my elbows out. So now I get this. So now, especially on a 9mm or anything that's of the similar caliber, I should have much more of a push than a flip. I'm okay with this firearm pushing in like this because my front sight stays pretty level. It's not hard to reacquire my next shot. So from here, 45-degree, firearm in, elbows out. Think about it as more of a push-up than than anything else. But again, we don't want this. We want this, absorbing the shock in our elbows in that push-up position. So that's the wrist angle and the elbow position. Let's take a look at the actual firearm position. Well, first things first, I want to get as high up on this back strap as I can. Okay, so I want the web of my hand right here to get as high up on the back of this gun as I can. So all the way to the top. Now on a 1911, you've got that nice beaver tail safety that acts as a great, a great reference point for you. On a Glock or anything else, it's just as high up as you can get it, right? If I could get directly behind what's called your bore axis, the bore of your firearm, that bore axis, if I could get directly behind that, that'd be ideal, because then I could really control it with the maximum efficiency. The problem is, obviously, the slide has to go back and forth for the firearm to work, so that won't work. I want to get as high as I can to get as close to that bore axis point as I can. If I hold the gun down here, obviously this leverage is going to recoil much more. You're going to get a lot more muzzle rise or muzzle flip, whatever term you're used to. You're going to get a lot more of that than if I get up here to control it. Now it's much, much more difficult because of the leverage point. So that's first thing. Second thing, I want my other hand to use up all of this palm swell. Another very common mistake that I see is shooters take their shooting hand, I'm right-handed, so this would be my right hand, and I put my thumb down here. Or they feel that groove on a Glock and they put their thumb right in there. Well, that groove is to be used if you're shooting one-handed. If you're shooting two-handed, now I've got all this space in here. You know, there's a lot of space where I'm not contacting this weapon. I want maximum contact on the grip frame as I can get. So if I'm here and I'm trying to hold onto this firearm, there's a whole lot of wiggle room in here. I want to make sure I've got my thumb high because this grip frame, this entire panel, should be taken up by this hand. Okay, I'm literally just taking my entire palm across it. So here, now my hand closes in that good 45-degree angle. My hand closes by touching. This finger is actually touching the bottom of the trigger guard. Here. This thumb finds that reference point on the side of the grip, and this thumb lays down on top of my other hand. So a good two-handed stance, or a good two-handed grip, all the way up on the back strap of the weapon, keeping that grip panel clear. Get this thumb out of the way. This hand all the way around it, good 45-degree angle. Contact point, bottom of the trigger guard. Contact point, right here. Contact point, right here. 4 contact points. First, top of the back strap. Second, bottom of the trigger guard. Third, right here, just below the slide. And fourth, on the other hand. Now I've got maximum control so that I'm minimizing movement this way and this way. I've got maximum resistance on both sides. So now I can absorb that energy displacement that's happening when that recoil happens is now getting absorbed in my elbows as opposed to my wrist. So now I can keep my shots very flat, and as I press through targets, I'm not having to reacquire that sight picture every time. You get good with your grip and you're really squeezing hard with that left hand. Right hand, you want to make sure that you can get your trigger, that trigger press just straight back to the rear as opposed to actually pulling or pushing the trigger. You want to just press it straight back to the rear. As long as you're keeping a good solid grip with your non-shooting hand, in this case my left hand, and a good angle, that press should be very clean, very precise. It'll help your accuracy. It'll definitely help your recoil control. You'll see shooters that were going from here, getting a good grip, and going to here. It's an entirely different ballgame. Much more pleasant way of shooting, much more effective way of shooting. Proper grip is the beginning of all the foundation where everything can fall apart or everything can come together. The grip, I would argue, is the most important fundamental of shooting other than the trigger control.